Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A Lethbridge City Councillor is bringing forth a motion to repeal our city's face covering bylaw. Environment Canada's warning about a prolonged heat wave for our region. The city has some tips on how you can beat the heat. And we hear from the interim leader of the Wildrose Independence Party, who explains why Alberta would be strongest as its own sovereign nation.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The former Minneapolis, Minnesota police officer charged in the murder of George Floyd received his sentence today. Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years behind bars. This closes a chapter in a case that sparked global outrage and a reckoning on racial disparities in the United States. The 45-year-old former cop is widely expected to appeal his sentence. He also still faces trials on several federal civil rights charges, along with 3 other officers fired who have yet to receive their trials. Chauvin was convicted of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter after killing George Floyd. Minnesota's Attorney General Keith Ellison says he's hoping the judge's 22-and-a-half-year sentence on former police officer Chauvin will be a moment for change, and he urged people to act.
For the sake of all the lives that have been lost, for the sake of the terrible sacrifices that too many families like the Floyds have had to make, and for the sake of the many officers who strive to serve and protect with dignity and honor and high standards, and for the sake of the community. Time is up. It's time to act. We're counting on you. We're counting on each other. We need every community member to continue the call for real reform and meaningful change. Peacefully, constructively, but clearly. This is a moment for change, and your call for it is making it happen.
Closer to home, Lethbridge City Councillor Ryan Parker is co-sponsoring a motion to repeal our city's face covering bylaw. The motion will come before City Council next Tuesday. Parker says with the province removing the mask covering order on July the 1st, the city should do the same to avoid any confusion. Parker says he's hoping for a unanimous vote at Tuesday's City Council meeting. Parker says there's really no need for any face covering bylaw anymore.
First and foremost, we have to be an expert at listening to the experts. And Dr. Henshaw in Alberta Health has told us that a health order of having it mandatory throughout the province isn't needed at this time and is not recommended. So I think it's important that we have our city bylaws in line with Alberta Health, be an expert at listening to experts. So since our last meeting before July 1st is on the 29th, it'd probably be the most appropriate time to do it.
Councillor Parker adds that in order to pass 3 readings of the bylaw in one session, all councillors will have to unanimously agree to do that. For this week's poll question, we asked if you agreed with the Alberta government moving on to Stage 3 and removing almost all COVID-19 restrictions on Canada Day. Well, the results are in, and 80% of you said yes. Make sure you log on to our website, bridgecitynews.ca, again on Monday to participate in our latest poll, and it has something to do with Canada Day. Temperatures in our city are set to hit over 30 degrees this weekend. Environment Canada is warning about a prolonged heat wave across much of Alberta for the next week. The City of Lethbridge is encouraging residents to be mindful of the sweltering heat during days like today. Luke Palmer, the Emergency Preparedness Manager for the city, says there are tips you can follow to beat the heat.
They need to stay hydrated and drinking water before you feel thirsty, as that's kind of a sign of dehydration already setting in. We want to make sure that if you're going outside that you're doing so in non-peak hours, and the peak hours that we do look at are between noon and 2 p.m. when temperatures are the hottest. And if you are going out, making sure that you're dressed appropriately, wearing light, loose clothing and a brimmed hat, along with sunscreen and sunglasses. If you are forced to be outside as well, make sure that you're taking frequent breaks, getting into the shaded areas or inside when available.
The scorching hot temperatures will continue into next week with a high of 37 degrees expected on Wednesday. Wow. The city says if you've been financially impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, you can still apply for the COVID-19 Housing Supplement Program. The initiative was established last February when City Council approved $500,000 in one-time funding working with the Lethbridge Housing Authority to administer the program. The program is open to homeowners and renters. Some of the criteria is you have to been a Lethbridge resident for the past 6 months, and the gross household income must be at or lower than the core need income threshold. For a one-bedroom, it's $30,000 a year, $38,500 for a two-bedroom, and $43,000 for a three-bedroom. The Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce has received over $139,000 of federal Shop Local funding. The new funding will allow the Chamber to continue its efforts to encourage the community to support local businesses and organizations. CEO of the Chamber, Cindy Voss, says the funding will be split into 4 different initiatives, including shopping at your local stores.
We're also going to do Invest Local, which is looking at our companies that are strong commodity makers in our community, so those economic growth developers. We're going to look at Explore Local, so those are the businesses that are offline, that we have to go experience and connect with. And then Build Local will be focusing on our local talent and really developing that talent and encouraging them to stay local and help continue to grow our community.
The funding is in a partnership agreement between both the Lethbridge Chamber and Alberta Chamber. And if your business or organization would like to receive some funding, you can email or call the Lethbridge office for more information. The Lethbridge College Kodiak's women's basketball team has appointed a new head coach ahead of the 2021-2022 season. Ken McMurray will be taking the reins. He spent last season as a co-coach alongside of Deanna Simpson. McMurray has over 30 years of coaching experience with the Cardston Cougars boys and girls teams. McMurray says he's excited to see how the Kodiak's team will shape up this fall.
It's going to be interesting to see who's coming back and who's moving on with their life, because it's difficult when student athletes kind of put their lives on hold with COVID and their hopes of playing, and then they can't play, and so then they have to decide whether they want to continue and do it again, and so we've had some girls that have moved on. So I really don't know what our team's going to look like. I think we're going to be, really young with a few veterans, and hopefully we can get them in a good place where they're playing good basketball.
With Simpson stepping down, McMurray says he's currently looking for an assistant coach for the upcoming season. The town of Colehurst may see some major changes following this October's municipal election. Ron Lagmet has been a councillor for the town for many years, and now he's decided to make the switch and will run for mayor. As Micah Quinn explains now, Lagmet says big decisions have to be made for the town, and he's just the man to do them.
Ron Lagmet says one of the main goals of his campaign will be to focus on the town instituting a stronger business base.
We would first have an engagement process so that the community understands what the plans are, but that we can also bring into the plan some of the ideas that are out there that we haven't yet considered. With the plans, we need to be able to take it forward into a reality. So we'll have to have some economic development management systems and initiatives to make sure that that actually continues on after the engagement sessions.
The town of Colehurst has an area of land that was annexed in the south end. Lagmet says he would also focus on expanding that area and work to revive the town's business while tying that into community engagement.
So it's a very central kind of point where the walking paths, where life can happen, and we want it designed in that kind of way. We don't expect that it'll be blowing out in an immediate fashion, but we have designed it in such a way that we work with developers to make sure that it's a contiguous plan, so that everything kind of flows nicely, so that over the next 10, 15 years, where we could see close to a doubling in our population if that goes well.
Lagmet says Colehurst is seeing positive growth and will continue to see more into the future, with himself potentially at the helm as mayor. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Earlier this week, the federal government announced the easing of restrictions for essential workers who are fully vaccinated when entering Canada. Fully vaccinated Canadians don't have to complete the 14-day isolation period, but still have to show a negative test when entering. Meanwhile, south of the border, the U.S. government has been pushing Canada to reopen the international border this summer, which has been closed for the last 16 months. Deputy Mayor of the village of Coots, Scott McCumber, says once the borders reopen, the village is hoping to see a lot more traffic.
When travelers are traveling for pleasure, they tend to stop in and see what's going on. So they'll stop in at the duty-free store, they'll stop in at the motel, the convenience store, the restaurant, and they'll do that just because they're traveling and enjoying themselves. Whereas right now, essential travel doesn't allow that. So when the border opens, we can see our businesses will be getting more traffic and more business. On the personal side is we have a lot of friends and relatives that live on the US side that we can't go see right now. And so as soon as the border opens, I think there'll be a flood of traffic going down to Montana and parts beyond to go see friends, relatives, and sightseeing.
The border remains closed for all non-essential traffic until at least July the 21st. For the first time since the start of the pandemic, chuck wagon racing is back. Starting on July 17th, the High River Agricultural Society grounds will be hosting a 2-weekend event. The World Professional Chuck Wagon Association will be putting on the Battle of the Foothills show, which will consist of 38 wagons from across Alberta and Saskatchewan. President of the Ag Society, Tanya Fro, says she's most excited about the atmosphere that everyone has missed over the past year.
That feeling of normalcy is the biggest thing. Our capacity is roughly 3,000 people, and we're really excited because our grandstand really comes alive when you get a bunch of people in there. It's aluminum, and when people start stomping as the chuck wagons start coming around the fourth corner coming home, it really, really comes alive. The drivers say that they can hear it, they can feel it, the horses love it. It's like thunder, and it's just really, really cool. So it's a really exciting moment when they start coming home for that final stretch.
Up for grabs is $150,000 worth of prize money. The event will run on the weekends of July 17th and July 23rd, and you can purchase tickets by visiting highriverag.com. Some of the latest poll numbers have the NDP leading the UCP in Alberta, and the Wildrose Independence Party is not far behind. Now, this is not the same Wildrose Party you may remember when Brian Jean was at the helm. This one is wanting to make Alberta a sovereign country. We asked the party's interim leader, Paul Hinman, what they're really all about.
We're there to put Albertans first, to protect their freedoms, their livelihood, their freedom of religion, and these other governments, just the personal and industrial attacks on Albertans is just unacceptable, and people are looking for a solution, and that's what the Wildrose Independence Party is that they're here to actually to serve the people and not have the people servants of the government.
Mr. Hinman will also address the issue of splitting the vote on the right in the next provincial election. That informative Q&A is coming up later in our broadcast. Some members of the Catholic community say they will turn over all historical documents on the 48 residential schools it ran in Saskatchewan and British Columbia. Those schools include the Marival Indian Residential School and the Cowessess First Nation in Saskatchewan and the Kamloops Indian Residential School, where hundreds of unmarked graves have been found. The missionary of Oblates of Mary Immaculate says it will work to make the historical documents available, but it may take some time due to complications with national and provincial privacy laws. The Union of BC Indian Chiefs says it is disgusted by what it calls the extreme callousness and ignorance shown by Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett. Bennett sent a text to MP Jody Wilson-Raybould implying the MP was more interested in a parliamentary pension when she urged the Prime Minister to act on residential schools rather than call for a fall election. A statement from the UBCIC says Bennett's message was a sign of her racism and spitefulness. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that Bennett will not lose her ministerial position because she apologized and understands her commitment to reconciliation. Florida officials say there are still 159 people unaccounted for after the partial collapse of a beachside condo complex in the southern part of the state. Officials in Miami-Dade say the death toll currently stands at 4, but is expected to rise.
Unfortunately, this has been a tragic night. We do have 120 people now accounted for, which is very, very good news. But our unaccounted for number has gone up to 159. In addition, we can tragically report the death count is now 4. I want to be very clear about the numbers. They're very fluid. We'll continue to update you as we have them, but we have confirmed 4 deaths.
The state of Hawaii will relax COVID-19 restrictions for tourists and residents beginning on July the 8th. Officials say the state expects to have around 60% of the population fully vaccinated by that point, allowing for restrictions to be eased.
Hawaii is nearing 60% fully vaccinated rate. We do expect to reach this mark on or about July 8th. That's 2 weeks from today. This means that we'll be able to safely relax some of the travel and social restrictions currently in place. So I am announcing today that effective July 8th, individuals traveling in the United States who are traveling domestically will be able to bypass quarantine and pre-travel testing requirements when traveling to Hawaii if they are fully vaccinated.
It was on this day that the Korean War began. Custer met his end at the Battle of Little Bighorn, and author George Orwell was born. This is Today in History for June the 25th.
June 25th, 1950. In Asia, war breaks out on the Korean Peninsula as forces from the communist north invade the non-communist south. The United States soon joins the fighting on the side of South Korea. President Harry Truman.
Korea is a small country, thousands of miles away. But if what is happening there is important to every American.
1876. In Montana, the Battle of Little Bighorn. That's where Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry are wiped out by Sioux and Cheyenne Indians. 1973. On Capitol Hill, former White House counsel John Dean begins testifying before the Senate panel investigating the Watergate scandal.
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it.
The scandal forces Richard Nixon to become the first president to resign the following year. 1903. George Orwell, the author whose novels include Animal Farm and 1984, is born Eric Blair in Bengal, India. And 1997.
The reason why I love the sea, I cannot explain. That was the way it happened to me.
Jacques Cousteau, the underwater explorer and filmmaker, dies in Paris at age 87. Today in History, June 25th. Tim McGuire, The Associated Press.
It was a huge celebration in Montreal last night as the Montreal Canadiens beat the Las Vegas Golden Knights 3-2 in overtime and won their series 4-2. For the first time in 10 years, a Canadian team will be going to the Stanley Cup final. Montreal is awaiting the winner of the Tampa Bay New York Islanders series. If the Habs do win the Cup, it'll be the first time in 28 years that a Canadian team has won the Stanley Cup. Now, the last Canadian team to hoist Lord Stanley's mug was the Montreal Canadiens back in 1993. And by the way, during that celebration, 15 arrests were made and 8 police cars were damaged. It was a beautiful summer-like day here in Lethbridge, and the hot temperatures will be sticking around throughout the weekend. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. We had lots of blue sky and sunshine yet again today. Now, if you're planning a trip out to the lake this weekend, it should be a great time to do so. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, pull out that sunscreen for an amazing weekend. It's shaping up.
A lovely weekend indeed, and a scorching hot week to follow as well, as we look at these temperatures moving from the 20s straight up into the 30s and well into the high 30s there by the mid of next week there. But into tomorrow, we're looking at sunshine, beautiful day for Saturday, 29 degrees. We're looking at a wind at northwest, 20 kilometers per hour, gusting to 40 kilometers per hour at times. Into Sunday, we're jumping all the way up to 31 degrees, 35 for Monday, 36 for Tuesday, and then Wednesday and Thursday sitting at 37 degrees. So it is going to be absolutely scorching. Lots of sunshine to keep hydrated. Get your sunscreen. Average high for this time of year, 23. We're going to be so far above that. It's not even funny how much further above that we're going to be. 10 degrees is our average low for this time of year. 33 was our high temperature in 1988. And back in 1951, we had 3 degrees as our lowest temperature on record. Sun rose this morning at 5:25 a.m. Sunset this evening, 9:43 p.m., giving us 16 hours and 18 minutes of daylight. So we're now sitting at 1 minute less than we were last week. So a heat warning is in effect for British Columbia starting tomorrow into basically by Wednesday for sure. 31 Victoria, 30 Vancouver, going to feel hotter with the humidex. 30 in Edmonton, lots of sunshine. Beautiful day in Calgary as well with a high of 29 degrees. Could get that 40 kilometer per hour wind gusts there as well. 29 in Saskatoon, lots of sunshine. Now both Winnipeg and Regina sitting at 27 degrees, 30% chance of showers tomorrow with a risk of an afternoon thunderstorm. So going to be a bit muggy as well. As we look to Toronto, we're looking at a chance of showers, risk of a thunderstorm there as well. Same thing for Ottawa. Ottawa sitting at 21 tomorrow, 25 in Toronto, 24 degrees in Montreal. Montreal looking at periods of rain tomorrow. Now we're looking at a 30% chance of showers or drizzle tomorrow in Fredericton with a high of 26. Same thing, actually no, more of a 60% chance of showers or drizzle in Halifax, high of 24 degrees. Should be a nice day in Charlottetown though, looking a little windy there though, mix of sun and cloud, 26 degrees the high, and a beautiful, lovely 24 degrees and sunshine in St. John's, Newfoundland. So there you got it. There's your weather.
A new study released by Stats Canada says childcare workers saw a 21% drop in employment in February from the same period last year. That compares with a 3% drop in overall employment. It says the sector was severely impacted by lockdowns and restrictions on childcare services during the pandemic. It does say, however, that the number of childcare workers is expected to grow in response to the planned investment in this year's federal budget for a new Canada-wide early learning and childcare plan. BlackBerry has trimmed its net loss to $62 million US in the first quarter, despite lower revenues. The Ontario-based company says it lost 11 cents per share in the 3 months ending May 31st, compared with a loss of $1.14 per share, or $636 million a year earlier. Revenues decreased 15.5% to $174 million from $206 million in the first quarter of fiscal 2021. The U.S. government does not plan to cancel federal permits for Enbridge's Line 3 oil pipeline project. This week's court filing by engineers with the U.S. Army defended its decision in November to grant Enbridge a water permit for the project. It was the last major approval the Calgary-based company needed. The Minnesota segment of the pipeline is more than 60% complete. The Wisconsin and Canadian sections are already carrying oil. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 15 points on the day to finish at 20,230. The Dow was up 237 points to 34,434. The S&P 500 was up 14 points to 4281, and the Nasdaq was down 9 points to 14,360. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 75 cents to 74.05 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 8 cents to 350 US. Gold was up 626 to 1781.44 US an ounce, and silver was up 16 cents to 26.10 US an ounce. Wheat is at $338 per metric ton. Barley's also at $338. Canola's at $7.97, and corn is at $398 per metric ton. Live cattle were unchanged at $122.83. Feeder cattle were up $2.40 to $159.55, and lean hogs were up $1.93 to $101.95. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 81.34 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the former Minnesota police officer charged in the murder of George Floyd received his sentence today. Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22.5 years behind bars. This closes a chapter in a case that sparked global outrage and a reckoning on racial disparities in the United States. The 45-year-old former cop is widely expected to appeal his sentence. He also still faces trials on federal civil rights charges, along with 3 other fired officers who have yet to have their trials. Should Alberta separate and become its own sovereign nation? Keep the money with all of the natural resources right here in the province? Some say, well, yes, we should. Coming up, a fascinating interview with the interim leader of the Wildrose Independence Party, Mr. Paul Hinman, who discusses why he thinks Alberta should separate. Alberta politics has been quite heated over the last year, with calls for Premier Jason Kenney to resign and for Alberta to even separate. Today we're joined by veteran politician Paul Hinman. He was the first leader of the original Wildrose Party and also served as the MLA for Cardston-Tabor-Warner from 2004 to 2008. Paul is currently the interim leader of the Wildrose Independence Party of Alberta. Paul, welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Hal.
First of all, tell us a bit about your party and why you feel that Alberta really needs a change in government.
Well, the NDP were a disaster and toxic for Alberta. The UCP have been well, they've been traitors to us. That they haven't stood up and put Alberta's interests first. They've just basically been laid down to Ottawa. And we need a premier and a provincial government that actually understands the needs of the province of Alberta, our people, our industry. And it's just been a complete failure. We've gone from bad to worse. We have governments that are just spending is out of control, and people realize that we need a government that's actually going to protect their personal interests, their lives, their property, their freedoms. And this just isn't happening for Albertans, and we're really getting hurt bad by our government.
Now, a recent Angus Reid poll, Paul, says that among decided voters, 41% support the NDP, 30% for the UCP, and a surprising 20% for your party, for the Wild Rose. Did the poll results maybe surprise you a little bit?
The reception and the growth of our party has been phenomenal. And yes, I guess it bumped a little bit higher than we expected. But the bottom line, Albertans are tired of picking the lesser of two evils, and they're quite excited and jumping towards the Wild Rose Independence Party, and for good reason. That we're there to put Albertans first, to protect their freedoms, their livelihood, their freedom of religion. And these other governments, just the personal and industrial attacks on Albertans are just unacceptable. And people are looking for a solution. And that's what the Wild Rose Independence Party is that they're here to actually to serve the people and not have the people servants of the government.
Now, let's break down the numbers actually for just a moment when you do the math here. According to that poll, many conservative-minded voters are likely thinking, this is going to just be a repeat of the election in 2015, splitting the vote on the right and the NDP going right up the middle and winning. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I would say it's not about splitting the vote. It's about not wasting your vote. And why would any Albertan want to waste their vote again on the UCP and I just want to say their betrayal of Albertans. And we absolutely know that the NDP was disastrous, that the debt that they unloaded to us, they never fixed anything except for they put forward their personal agendas to the detriment of Alberta. I mean, look what they did to our oil and gas industry, and it's continued to be decimated. This idea of a social license. We have two governments that are bent on following Ottawa's divisive rules. They're rigged against Albertans, and they're not there for us. And so rather than, like I say, wasting a vote on the NDP or the UCP, people can actually vote for a party that they believe in, that know that's going to be there for Albertans and for freedom and for families and just the future for Alberta. These other parties have no interest in Alberta's future.
It appears as though your party, the Wild Rose Independence Party, is gaining momentum here in Alberta. How many members do you have in your party right now?
Well, we're approaching 8,000 paid members. We're quite excited with the activity. And again, each week, the governments continue to hurt us. And like with Bill C-10 being passed on censorship, every time the governments do things, we see a boost. The lockdowns have been detrimental when they arrest pastors, when they shut down businesses. People are realizing that we've got to go somewhere else. And we just keep seeing the donations and the memberships ticking up week after week.
How many local constituency associations do you have so far?
Well, there's 87 in Alberta, and we have 50 of them, give or take a few, that are up and running, and we'll continue to bring them online as quick as we can, but it takes a little bit of work with COVID and not being able to meet with people. But we're like I say, we're approaching 50 if we haven't hit 50 this week. And we have a pipeline of CA people that are wanting to get up and running, and it's just been enjoyable to work with the different groups that are excited to be part of this movement.
Now, Paul, realistically, will you have a shot at having a candidate in each Alberta riding in 2023?
I'm very confident we will. Back in 2008, we were able to fill the slate. 2004, we filled the slate. And we think there's nothing more important than for every Albertan to be able to vote for something they believe in. And it's just that there's people stepping forward, there's great interest, and I'm very confident that we will have a full slate across all 87 constituencies here in Alberta.
Now, you believe that a sovereign Alberta is the only solution. How would you go about deciding this if you won the election?
Well, it's an excellent question. And, when anybody ever wants to be independent and out on their own, there's steps that they need to take to do that. And to be an independent country is no different. The top two things that we would need to do is be first to create our own police force and judiciary system, that we'd have to, have a patch over and to take control from the RCMP here for a provincial police force, one that has elected civilian oversight. Number two, we need to start collecting all of the taxes here in Alberta by Albertans for Albertans, and not sending our hard-earned dollars down to Ottawa and then putting our hand out asking even for lunch money to come back. It's been a complete black hole We send $50 billion down to Ottawa, and then we beg for money to come back, and that's just not acceptable anymore. We create our own Alberta pension plan so people can have confidence in the future. We have our own employment insurance policy here so that Albertans are supporting Albertans and not the rest of the country with their lax employment rules compared to ours. We'd actually govern ourselves with our own environmental legislation, and we'd actually continue to be able to promote Alberta industry, especially our oil and gas, which is just world renowned. I mean, we've set so many precedents when it comes to the good environmental regulations. Just all of those things have been cared for very carefully, and we're an example to the world, and the world needs more Alberta oil, not less, and we want to preserve that industry here. We'll protect it. We'll also look after our immigration policy, all of those things that will take those steps to exercise our full autonomy so Albertans can have great confidence and say, oh, wow, this really is working. This is wonderful, and have confidence to be able to then themselves voting in a referendum on sovereignty and not having politicians decide for them.
Now, Paul, you mentioned the energy sector for just a moment there, oil and gas sector. How would you actually get our products to Tidewater? That's a big concern, even with Premier Kenney discussing that.
Well, that's an excellent question. And as a member of Canada, we've seen very much that they're able to shut us down. That's one of the benefits of being a sovereign nation. International law does not allow countries to block other countries from exporting and getting their produce or bringing resources in from Tidewater. We'd actually be in a much better position, but not only that, the Eagle Spirit Energy Corridor, those Indigenous people are very anxious and wanting to deal and to get a corridor going through northern BC. And I just think that the opportunity would be exciting as a Wild Rose independent government to be able to move forward on these issues and not be blocked anymore by our current federal government, who says we're not allowed to have that right, even though the Constitution says we have it. They have not allowed us to exercise that right here in Alberta. So it would be an actual plus, not a negative.
Have you had a chance to chat with Jay Hill, the interim leader of the Maverick Party, who wants to see the Western provinces join forces and separate?
Yes, and Jay, I haven't spoken to him recently, but he's always said, we need to try once more and to send MPs to vote no. I mean, the great benefit of the Maverick Party is bringing Western Canada together, and that's what we need to do. There's nothing more powerful than if Northern BC and Alberta and Saskatchewan were to come together and want to form a Western Canada that would be strong and free. That would be exciting, but we have to do it on the provincial levels, and so we just want to lead here with Alberta and then allow BC and Saskatchewan, maybe Manitoba wants to join us, certainly the territories. I just think it's an exciting opportunity to have a strong and free country as opposed to one that's got the ball and shackles of Ottawa telling us what we can and can't do.
So, Paul, what are your thoughts on equalization payments? Has Alberta been giving too much, as Premier Kenney suggested?
Well, people always talk about equalization payments. The problem is that we pay too many taxes. Equalization is just a small part of it. And I mean, the amount of money that we send in taxes versus what we're represented and allowed to participate in, it's laughable. And so it's a lot more than just equalization. It's the taxation of Albertans. It's the regulations of Alberta industries. It's the shutting down of our pipelines and our opportunities to export our products. I mean, it's the attack on our beef industry and agriculture. All of those things are attacks from Ottawa. And equalization, that's what you want to say, the flavor that people like to talk about, but it's a lot bigger problem than just equalization.
Now, one of the complaints against the UCP is how it would handle the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the issues you're concerned about is the extent of the restrictions, killing a lot of the small businesses, and limiting religious freedom. Can you explain some of your concerns about the restrictions?
Absolutely. This is decimated so many lives. This government, who's supposed to be looking after the interest of the individuals and families and businesses, has only been interested in looking after their faulty healthcare system. Number one, they never ever compared and showed that, gosh, every year in the flu season, our ICUs are maxed out. They created all this fear mongering like it was something new and unusual. And, they didn't even allow for treatment. They canceled their own uh, tests, I guess, if you want to say, like on ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine last July. They didn't pursue any answers. They just fell lock and step with the World Health Organization, which we know has not been in the best interest of people outside of China. And again, the way this government is picking and choose, what industries can be open. It's okay for hundreds and thousands of people to go to Costco and to Walmart, but we can't have 200 people attend a church. I mean, there was never anything scientific about this. This was just attack on people's individuals' business, their lives, their families, scaring children and saying they can't go to school when there's overwhelming evidence that COVID was not a problem for children. It was a problem for seniors. It was a problem for seniors with preconditions. And yet they've blown this totally out of proportion. They always say follow the science when they themselves just go back and forth on it. And again, what's my biggest concern, historically, the flu shot has been for seniors, and we'd allow them to pick and choose. And for Premier Kenney to say that we want 70% vaccination from those 12 years of age and up, this vaccine has not gone through the proper what would I say, the proper steps for safety that we do. This is being put out under the Emergency Act, and the efficacy and the safety of this shot has not been determined. But it is interesting that the information is finally coming out, and the WHO, just came out this week on Monday and says, you know what, we really shouldn't be giving this shot to children. This mRNA is scary stuff. It's unknown, it's experimental, and it's just unbelievable that we've set up a lottery here in the province encouraging people to be participating in this, and there's been no informed consent.
Paul, we only have a few moments left here. How would a Wildrose government have handled the COVID-19 pandemic differently?
Well, excellent question. And first of all, we should be creating a more robust healthcare system. I mean, we had the Butter Dome that was never used. There's no reason why we didn't increase, respiratory therapists and other things to prepare for it, especially for the second wave. But the most important thing is the government should be collecting all of the information out there and the best practices and allowing doctors to pursue what they think is the right thing. This one thought, central government censored decisions. I mean, I'm not sure if you heard about Dr. Francis Christian, who just got fired at the University of Saskatchewan because he was speaking out about vaccinating children. I mean, this is totalitarian, authoritarian thuggery where academia and individuals' lives are being threatened if you don't go along with the government's dictates. And it's just unbelievable to me, the situation that we're in. And what government's job is to collect that information, disseminate it, and to allow professionals, whether it's doctors or nurses or whatever, to use their best judgment and their years of practice to actually be treating individuals. And this idea of the dog chasing its tail with those PCR tests, which we know had an inflated number of false positives to scare people. Everything the government did was about fear mongering and taking away people's hopes, scaring our children, saying, don't go visit your grandparents, you might be the one who kills them. Everything was backwards. When you listen to someone like Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond, who specializes and was an actual emergency act specialist, we've done everything wrong. You don't turn over the province and the economy to a doctor to shut everything down. And again, they didn't treat people as individuals. They just were treating numbers. All we ever heard time and time again was we need to protect our healthcare system, but they never increased the capacity, the robustness. We've been, our healthcare system has been overrun for 20 years. And yet, do we have more hospitals, more nurses? Do we have more facilities and treatments? No, we don't. And we spent billions of dollars and still have nothing to show for it. And it's the same with our senior care facilities. We should have been increasing those senior care facilities and creating isolation places. So many things that should have been done that weren't. And this government has no interest in Albertans or in their businesses. They only have interest in their healthcare system. And I want to say just a facade of virtue signaling, which has not been in the interest of Albertans.
Paul Hinman is the interim leader of the Wildrose Independence Party of Alberta. Paul, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to it again.
Well, some Canadians think that religion is helpful for the country, but there are others who would disagree. But how many of us believe that religion is something that's actually important to Canada's economy? Well, today's guest says that that is exactly the case. I'm joined by Dr. Brian Grimm. He holds a doctorate in quantitative sociology and is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation. He's one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between religious freedom and the economy, and is also the author of a recent paper entitled The Hidden Economy: How Faith Helps Fuel Canada's GDP. That is a mouthful. Dr. Brian Grimm, thanks so much for being with us today. Welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you.
So can you first of all tell us a bit about what your organization does?
Yeah, so we're a private foundation, public foundation, non-religious foundation that helps businesses see that religious freedom for everyone, including people that don't have a religion, is good for economies and good for business, and then helps businesses promote a more diverse, religiously diverse and inclusive workforce for their own companies. So we both produce studies, but also work with companies directly to help them become more religiously friendly or religiously inclusive, however you might like to phrase it.
Mm-hmm. Now, your study estimates the economic value of religion to Canadian society at about $30 billion annually. And I think the mid-range was estimated at around $67 billion, and the high-end estimate puts it at an astounding $690 billion. So can you explain how you go about finding that out, and what do those numbers even mean?
Yeah, well, the high number is just one that takes into account the sort of spending power of religiously affiliated Canadians. So that's just a reference number. That's what their household income is. The households of families that are religious have that much spending power. So that's not really the one we focus on. The middle range is the one that we do focus on, and just to put that in context, that would the religious economy of Canada would make it a larger economy than 110 countries in the world. So it would be like the 72nd largest economy in the world if you think of national GDP. So that's no small number. The way we go about it is looking first at the receipts and the amount of money coming into congregations of all sorts, Christian, Muslims, Jewish, all the different faith congregations, and then look at how they spend that money. So if you think about that, that's money. People usually think that's money coming in, they spend on themselves, but it's actually fueling economies because you pay salaries, either it's clergy or groundskeepers. You pay, especially in Canada, for snow removal, from parking lots. They pay for lights, heating, electricity. But more than that, then we look at what is the value of what they do for society. So more than faith congregations are more than just organizations that tend to their own flocks, but they provide daycare, they provide services for people with addiction, they provide community gathering places, and all of that has economic value. So we calculate that up. We also look at faith institutions like hospitals, universities, as well as faith-related businesses, and that comes to that total.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you say business, because when you first were explaining it, it sounds almost like a business model. But, then again, you get into how they help people. So there are some who might say that while religious organizations provide help for less fortunate, it doesn't actually translate into real dollars for the economy. But where do you see direct benefits to the economy? You mentioned educational.
Well, yeah. So, one is the direct spending. It's just money coming in and going out. That money doesn't just come into a collection plate and stay there and bury it under a mattress. It gets spent on community service and various program salaries, like I mentioned. The other is that some of the programs like Alcoholics Anonymous, if there wouldn't be faith congregations, almost half of them in Canada would have no place to meet. And so those have a spiritual aspect to them. Churches and other congregations open their doors to these, and we estimate that saves hundreds of lives every year. And that's if you count the loss of a life, statisticians count that as millions and millions of dollars for every premature death in terms of cost to the system, cost in lost wages, cost to families. So it's in some ways measuring the benefit is measuring the good that they do that prevents harm coming to people, such as addiction.
That's interesting. You also note that much of our healthcare comes from religious organizations. So, can you explain this?
Well, so in Canada, of course, much of the education and healthcare systems came often from the Catholic Church. So the foundations of many of even education and healthcare in Canada, most of it has religious roots. Now, these days, most of the hospitals and schools have, especially hospitals, have become nationalized. But in the background, you have that. But there are significant numbers of private faith-based hospitals, educational institutions, and schools. And one thing I'd say, even though the schools, many of them are Catholic schools or other Christian schools, they still get some tax dollars supporting them. But that whole foundation of education and what they're providing is there because of their faith connection. So you walk into a faith-based school, and immediately you see that this is something different. Kids are going to, a church service or a mass, and they're getting different kinds of teaching. So for someone to say, well, it's, that's not significant. Actually, it is a tremendous contribution that religion continues to make to Canadian society.
So, how would you respond to those who would argue that religion causes more problems than it's worth in Canada, especially when we're looking at some of the sex abuse scandals associated with religious leaders? And now, of course, the residential school atrocities are a huge focus, and then violent extremism. So, how do you respond to that?
Well, certainly, religion can be one of the greatest sources of hope and goodness in the world. And it can also be, when misused, one of the greatest sources of hurt and tragedy in the world. So not to whitewash those problems, those are serious problems. One of the ways that we see in a society like Canada is that religious freedom provides a framework for dealing with times when religion falls short of its ideals or commits crimes even. So that religious freedom allows sort of, you could say, a competitive marketplace, again, going back to an economic analogy, that, if one church or one denomination or one faith group is guilty of some atrocity, society itself comes in and challenges that. And rather than criminalizing religion, it goes after criminal activities that may have happened within a religion. So I think that in the free market economy, when you include that to include religious freedom, freedom itself provides those checks and balances for things that, like anything, just like the internet, it's good, but there's also a dark side. So that check and balance that we have in free societies, I think, is one of the greatest assets to deal with the negative side of religion.
Now, you mentioned religious freedom. So we've seen more restrictions on those religious freedoms recently in Western nations like the UK and the US, and right here in Canada. Is this currently, or will this at some point impact our economy negatively?
Yeah, well, absolutely. So just to use a current example, many of the immigrants coming into Canada, sort of fueling the next generation of innovation, come from countries where religion is central to their identities. And so if these folks come into Canada, whether they're Muslims or Sikhs or Hindus or Christians from from the global South or from the Middle East, if they don't feel that they're free to be their whole self, be that authentic self that faith is such an important part of, they're not going to feel like they can buy into the Canadian, project, so to speak. So that religious freedom's important for new immigrants, just as it is for other people in society. So when you feel like your faith, which for many people is a central part of their life, not everyone, but for those that it is, they don't go to work and think I'm just here to make money. They go to work, many for a purpose to glorify God. And so in that kind of thinking, that if they don't feel that they have religious freedom, that innovative, sort of spirit that says we're gonna work hard and make our country great, it gets diminished.
Right. Now, by the way, is faith on the decline in Canada overall, or is it increasing?
So overall, I mean, the faith has been on the decline in Canada, looking at census data. But faith is resilient in that there was a theory of secularization, that secularization would eventually drive religion out and just be sort of living in a few souls. But that's not really what has happened. So many of the people in Canada who are devoutly faithful continue to be. And one of the sort of secrets is that people who are more religious tend to have more kids, and then they raise more kids. So sort of built into this religious change that's happening is also what's going to happen in the next generations. First, you have the immigration coming in where people are much more religious. Second, immigrants that even aren't religious, like Chinese coming in from mainland China. I think I saw a statistic that half of them become Christians once they come to Canada. So, religion is not something that's just, sort of locked in walls, in a church or, a mosque or a synagogue. It's something's living and active. And so, I expect the religious makeup of Canada to continue to change, grow in different ways in the years to come.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. And then what about in the US? Do you see differences between Canada and the US overall, where faith is either on the rise or the decline?
Um, I mean, the U.S., of course, tends to be a bit more religious and actively religious, more public religion in the United States. There's also been a similar decline, and sociologists have different explanations. One that I think makes sense to me is that religion has become very political in the United States. So it becomes a hot button issue. If you're following the news, the U.S. Catholic bishops are, debating whether or not Joe Biden should be allowed to take communion, receive the Eucharist, and that's political. So and Joe Biden's response was, well, for me, my faith is not politics. My faith is, what sustains my soul. So I think that the question of the future of American religion is wrapped up in the degree to which faith can sort of reclaim that soulful ground rather than a political ground. And I think that will bring have more people interested in faith. But when it becomes political, it becomes divisive, and that doesn't really bode well for the future of religious growth.
Yeah, it just seems like everything these days are becoming so political. It's ridiculous. We don't have very much time left, but really quick, there are occasional arguments that if religious organizations can help restore the family unit, it could greatly reduce addiction problems, depression, gang violence, crime, which would end up saving the government and our economy huge amounts of revenue. So any thoughts on that real quick?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, what we find is that faith is a characteristic of many stable families. You can have a stable family and they don't have religion at all, but the data overwhelmingly show that where you have a more religiously active and involved family, they tend to have more longevity and a stronger family. When you have families, that's one of the most important resources for people facing addiction and other kinds of problems. Because I mean, we've done a lot of work with studying Alcoholics Anonymous and these other programs, and you can see such a difference between those who are addicted in these programs who have family support versus those who don't. And as they say in AA, you're either you're either institutionalized, dead, or you're following the AA program. That's one of their slogans, and you really see that when people don't have that family support, they tend to either get incarcerated or overdosing as well. So family is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Grimm. We appreciate having you on.
That's great, and glad to be with you today.
Absolutely. Dr. Brian Grimm is the founding president of the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation and the author of a recent paper entitled The Hidden Economy, How Faith Helps Fuel Canada's GDP. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.